Ecuador's president says the country is ready for the ease of lockdown measures, but mayors think otherwise. El Salvador's president authorizes the use of lethal force to crack down on gangs. And a warehouse fire in South Korea kills 25. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I'm Camila Escalante. Ecuador's President Lenin Moreno has announced that the country is ready to ease lockdown measures, but mayors and indigenous leaders say it's too early to reopen the country. Our correspondent Denise Herrera from Quito has the details.
President Lenin Moreno recently announced that Ecuador is ready to reopen some activities in the country. According to the government, now are the local authorities the responsible of making this new decision. The government said that the COVID-19 statistic shows that Ecuador is controlling the pandemic, so they are saying that the COVID-19 cases are decreasing in the country. Most of the mayors of Ecuador have They said that Ecuador is not ready to reopen some activities, and they are also recommending that Ecuador must to continue with the isolation. In this context, the indigenous movement, the CONAIE, have rejected also this new announcement. They said that they didn't receive any government help, and they are making their own decisions to stop with the spread of the COVID-19 in their territories. According to the government, Ecuador has around 24,600 cases of the new coronavirus, and 883 people have died because of this new virus. But the government are also including a new number of victims of the COVID-19. They said that around 1,300 people have died, probably because of this new virus.
El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele has authorized the use of lethal force to fight against heightened gang violence and homicides amid the coronavirus lockdown. President Bukele's decision comes after authorities registered over 50 gang-related murders over the weekend. Bukele also declared a state of emergency in prisons and began mixing up members of various gangs in the same cells, supposedly aimed at reducing violence. Human rights groups warn that such measures could worsen the situation and violate people's rights.
I agree with the president because he has to crack down on them. Otherwise, there will be more murders and our families will be at risk. I agree with him.
You tell the people or members of the armed forces, act with lethal force, and they can interpret it to mean shoot them, no matter if they're running, if they are surrendering. That's the risk that's being questioned. That's a violation of human rights in this country.
Brazil's Supreme Court suspended President Jair Bolsonaro's appointment of Alexander Ramajan as the new federal police chief. Supreme Court Justice Alexander de Moraes granted an injunction suspending the appointment of Ramajan, who is a family friend of Bolsonaro and the current head of the Brazilian intelligence agency. The ruling came after a request by the PDT party, which claimed Bolsonaro is trying to interfere in investigations that affect him personally. Two of Bolsonaro's sons are under investigation by the federal police. Our correspondent Brian Muir in Sao Paulo has the details.
2 weeks ago, when far-right Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro appeared at a small protest in front of National Army headquarters in which neo-fascist protesters were calling for the government to shut down the Supreme Court and Congress, he probably didn't think that he would get any repercussions from this that quickly. However, after Supreme Court Minister Celso de Mello opened an inquiry into the alleged violation of 8 crimes committed by President Bolsonaro a couple days ago, today, Alexandre de Moraes, another Supreme Court justice, blocked Bolsonaro's choice for federal police director. His choice for director, Alexandre Ramajan, is an old family friend of the Bolsonaro family and a friend of Carlos Bolsonaro, who's under investigation from the federal police for operating a fake news network. It's worth noting that Bolsonaro's other son, Flavio, is also under investigation from the federal police. So the reason that the Supreme Court has blocked this appointment is clear. It's conflict of interest. They're worried that Bolsonaro is trying to appoint Ramajan to protect his own children from investigations that are underway.
Indigenous communities in the Peruvian Amazon have presented complaints to international bodies saying that the state is discriminating against them and has abandoned them in the midst of the pandemic. Community leaders are demanding help from authorities before an unprecedented tragedy strikes their lands.
Over a month and a half has passed since a state of emergency was declared across Peru, but no plans have been made available to help indigenous communities in the Amazon, which are made up of 500,000 inhabitants.
We ask that they provide us with medicine and healthcare stations. We also need food, and local governments need to compromise to help us. Finally, the state needs to include us in the support fund of 380 soles being offered to citizens.
The Interethnic Association of Rainforest Development has called on international organizations to denounce the Peruvian government for discrimination due to a lack of protective measures for the indigenous communities.
Every day we're making these demands. We've sent out open letters and have even presented a complaint at the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights, to the UN, and other organizations to highlight the state's abandonment.
Regions in the Amazon like Loreto, Pucallpa, Madre de Dios, and San Martin do not have the necessary infrastructure to face the pandemic, as across Peru, people continue to die due to a lack of the necessary equipment in hospitals.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again in a minute. Welcome back. Trinidad and Tobago will be temporarily opening its borders to facilitate the repatriation of at least 60 citizens stuck in Suriname. The group will be isolated and tested for the novel coronavirus upon their return.
The Ministry of Health plans to house the Trinidadians who are based in Suriname at the UE St. Augustine Debe Penal campus. That facility can house up to 72 persons in individual rooms. I visited the facility yesterday, and all was in place to ensure that the Trinidadians that are returning will be comfortable and would receive the appropriate levels of care. In terms of testing, I am unaware if testing was done in Suriname, but what I can say is that we have already made arrangements to have all persons swabbed when they return to Trinidad and Tobago. In order for them to have a very efficient swabbing process, we've actually set up a swab team with primary care physicians from the SWRHA, and we've already identified and located swabs to ensure that all persons will be tested as they arrive.
Dominica will begin conducting community surveys to detect possible asymptomatic carriers of the novel coronavirus, as no new cases have been recorded in 21 days. Out of the country's 16 confirmed cases, 13 people have recovered and 3 remain active.
A total of 386 individuals have been tested for COVID-19 using PCR method in our lab. Of these 386, 370 were negative. And 21 days have passed since the last confirmed case was detected. Henceforth, the Ministry of Health will begin a community-based survey which will be implemented from the May 5th for the period of 1 month. The objectives of this survey include the detection of asymptomatic carriers and the determination of the extent of the infection in the general population. This survey will be conducted on the randomly selected proportion of households from all 7 health districts.
Hundreds of Bolivians stranded in Chile have set up a makeshift camp outside of the Bolivian consulate. From here, they will wait to be transported to the city of Iquique in northern Chile, where they will quarantine for 14 days before being allowed back into their country. The group, which includes children, is made up of mostly fruit pickers who traveled to Chile at the start of the year in search of work. While the camp has no access to running water or toilets and has them exposed to cold nights out in the open, they are hopeful now that it seems they may be able to return home.
The Bolivian state should soften its closed borders policy because it is objectively harming its citizens. and Chile has to make an effort to not discriminate.
Everyone has spent the night here, despite the cold and all that, but we have no other choice but to persevere.
There is no one to tell us what to do or the way to do it. So far we have no answers, no response.
In Colombia, a group of Venezuelan migrants attempting to return to their country have been stranded for 3 days in Bogota's northern highway. About 12 buses are parked on that highway. The Venezuelan citizens demand that President Ivan Duque and Bogota Mayor Claudia Lopez open a humanitarian corridor so that they can return to Venezuela without any problems. Experts warn that this gathering increases the risk of COVID-19 infection, precisely the reason why these Venezuelan citizens wanted to return to their homeland. Everyday citizens across the globe have been heavily disrupted due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but some activities cannot be stopped, like education and the distribution of food. Let's have a look at how families in Venezuela are facing the situation.
Venezuelan families are looking for ways to continue their daily activities while also maintaining the required social distancing measures during the quarantine. In between production and prevention, there is no contradiction, said President Nicolás Maduro recently, adding that what works for the economy can also be applied to the daily routines of families, like this baker who continues to bake for his neighbors.
I am part of the Hugo Chavez Bakers Front, and we've continued to work through the quarantine. Thanks to God and the government, our materials have stayed available. We have continued to receive flour, butter, sugar, salt, and yeast. I'm working every day selling my bread to the community.
The education sector has been one of the most affected by the quarantine, as the entire school year needed to be reorganized and now it ends its schedule for July. Students are being taught at a distance by teachers through social media apps. Some classes are also being given through the radio and on public television stations.
I don't feel like I'm learning anything right now, because I can look for anything on the computer. At the school, teachers help us learn. They make us practice. I learn more there.
According to UNESCO, across the world, 9 out of 10 students are not receiving regular classes, a figure representing 1.5 billion across 191 countries. In Latin America, 159 million students have been affected. In their search for alternatives, governments have turned to virtual learning, the television and the radio, and even handing out printed material.
This is a traditional sector using non-traditional methods, trying to move forward with new systems. It's very interesting that inside homes, the past and the future are meeting, and we believe the role of the family in the learning process is fundamental.
While distance learning is dependent on families, but the state continues to guarantee access to education.
This is a collective work by everyone, but some things can be lost in the process. The state, as a guarantor of our rights, needs to consider how to adapt the current systems to these new situations. A transformation of the education system needs to happen.
Venezuela is one of 6 countries in the region that continues to provide food to students as it works to design new education policies for the future.
Despite a strict national lockdown, rangers in South Africa's national parks are intensifying their anti-poaching efforts. Conservationists warn that due to global quarantine measures, poaching may increase in the region as tourist lodges remain empty. Rangers employed at the Greater Kruger Park have doubled their efforts to protect one of the nation's most important resources, its wildlife.
During this time, usually with the lodges being busy, there's a lot more eyes and ears out there as well. It's not necessarily anti-poaching eyes and ears, but it's, it's eyes and ears that pick things up, tracks or whatever. That's not there at the moment. So we need to be a lot more proactive than what we were in the past.
We haven't scaled back on any of our anti-poaching activities or wildlife security and conservation management. We can't afford to do that. We've also made a commitment to all our partners that we won't do that. And our job is to protect the raw material, which is the nature, conservation, as well as the ecosystem, and that's what we'll do, and we'll carry on doing that, lockdown or not.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back. U.S. workers will be looking to take action this May Day, as many have called for rent strikes and work stoppages. Among those calls is one made by People's Strike, the coalition calling for the mass actions on May Day to build towards a general strike. We connected with Kali Akunu, a member of Cooperation Jackson and People's Strike. He said in addition to seeking to protect working people, strike action seeks to put a stop to the onslaught of neoliberal policies being implemented through the exploitation of this crisis.
Well, we're starting with trying to defend the lives of our people. The way in which the United States government, both on the federal level and many of the state levels, have managed this crisis is put fundamentally essential workers and a lot of our communities, particularly Black and Latino communities, at grave risk. And now you see many states which are beginning to open very, very prematurely because the curve hasn't flattened. So the first thing is protecting our folks and letting the powers that be know that at this point, if they're not going to heed the scientific warnings, then we are going to determine when we go back and when it's going to be safe based upon pure scientific recommendations. The second reason that we're taking action is basically to stop the onslaught of neoliberal policies that they've been trying to implement through the exploitation of this crisis. Since this happened, we've seen, particularly on the federal level, the ending of many regulations protecting the environment, where they're just allowing more pollutants into the air and into our rivers, into our water systems. They've been targeting workers with ending many of their union certifications or threatening to do so. So we're sending a clear message that we're not going to tolerate that as well. And then the other thing that we're really trying to move on is redirecting the society in a much more positive direction. The reality of the situation is the status quo that existed before was dramatically, racist, exploitative, and it is what's created the conditions that have now kind of created this explosion of this crisis in Black and brown communities here in the United States. So we're going to advance a number of different demands on May Day and beyond, which really try to rectify this situation in society.
Kali Akuno also discussed the need for abolitionism-based alternatives to be implemented in the United States.
The primary demand there is that people need to be let out. We have the largest prison population in the world here in the United States. The conditions in most places are utterly deplorable. And they are just vectors for the spread of the coronavirus and other viruses, we should add. Here in Mississippi, we were facing several different viruses, even before this in epidemics in our prison system here, even before the coronavirus hit, due to the poor conditions and the lack of medical care. So folks need to be let out, and new alternatives, new abolitionist-based alternatives need to be implemented in our communities so that they're healthy and whole. But the reason why this is important, because if once it gains a bedrock in certain communities, and what I mean by bedrock, like once it's really embedded, this virus is really embedded in certain communities, which are totally disregarded in the best of times in this country, it's not going to remain isolated there. So if prisoners get it, that means prison guards get it. That means they bring it in home and it goes back into the community. And another population which we are really trying to elevate during this time is the homeless population. Here in the United States, we don't have anything remotely approaching universal health care. And that's a population which is billion strong here in the United States, that most often, if the only health care they receive is when they're arrested or discarded. So most people are getting sick. We have a number of homeless people in Jackson who've gotten sick and who've died in the past 2 months. They were never tested for the coronavirus, but all of the symptoms that we've heard from members in our community indicate that is what they passed from. And that means it's spreading exponentially. in our community via that population, which is receiving no medical aid, very little food aid, and very little social regard or concern. So this is teaching, I think, everybody how connected we all are and how we have to look after each other, I think in some new critical ways that will hopefully humanize the society a bit more. Time will tell, but that's definitely what we're going to be struggling for.
The World Health Organization is urging healthcare workers across the globe to be on the lookout for children who may exhibit symptoms similar to Kawasaki syndrome after testing positive for COVID-19. This has been reported primarily in the United Kingdom.
In some European countries that have had this inflammatory syndrome, which is similar to the Kawasaki syndrome, but it seems to be very rare. What we've asked for is for the global network of clinicians to be on alert for this and to ensure that they capture information on children systematically so that we could better understand what is occurring in children and so that we could better improve our understanding and guide treatment.
Britain's official death toll for COVID-19 victims jumps to over 26,000 as the country begins including out-of-hospital deaths, such as in care homes, for the first time.
Now, as the Health Secretary announced yesterday, from today we're moving to an improved daily reporting system for deaths, so that deaths in all settings are included wherever the individual has tested positive for COVID-19, rather than just those in hospitals. And those figures show that up to yesterday on the new measure, we have recorded an additional 3,811 deaths in total. And I think it's just important to say that those additional deaths were spread over the period from the 2nd of March to the 28th of April, so they don't represent a sudden surge.
Finland will reopen primary schools from May 14th as the country begins to lift coronavirus restrictions. The country imposed lockdown measures in mid-March, but this week the country's top health officials said that Finland managed to sharply curb the spread of the virus, which has so far left 206 people dead and infected almost 5,000.
Temporarily limiting the right of children and young people to contact teaching was unavoidable until we had got the virus sufficiently under control. And in Finland, we have succeeded in doing this. The impact of opening schools on the epidemic is small, and an equally important reason is that children's basic rights should not be limited more than absolutely necessary.
A fire at a warehouse in South Korea has killed 25 people. Local media reports that the blaze at the unfinished 4-story building in the city of Incheon, east of Seoul, has left 35 dead and 7 injured. The fire was reportedly started by an explosion during construction work involving combustible materials. Authorities ordered the mobilization of all necessary personnel and resources to find and rescue those trapped inside and extinguish remaining flames. Indian actor Irfan Khan, who starred in international hits such as Slumdog Millionaire and Life of Pi, has died at the age of 53. The Bollywood star, who was diagnosed with a neuroendocrine tumor in 2018, was admitted to a Mumbai hospital earlier this week with a colon infection. Born in the Indian desert state of Rajasthan, Khan discovered an early passion for acting and studied at the elite National School of Drama. The father of 2 acted in almost 100 films, but he consciously sidestepped traditional Bollywood tropes, focusing on the subtleties of his craft with fresh storylines.
It was very shocking. I mean, he was suffering for quite some time, but we were hoping that he would recover and we would be able to see more of him on screen. So it was definitely shocking, like something that adds on to already the sad thing with the pandemic that is going on.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at tellustorenglish.net. And we're also on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Our English, I'm Camila Escalante. Thanks for watching.